I'm about to get a little scientific, as you might have been able to tell from the title of this video. When I created this channel, I said that my goal was to educate my audience, and I hope that I've done that with my videos on Soviet history, but I'm no historian. Despite the detail I go into in my videos regarding this topic, my commentary in the realm of history comes from the perspective of a largely untrained, albeit enthusiastic amateur. However, the subject I'm about to tackle does indeed lie within the realm of my academic concentration, and in making this video, I hope to help uncover the fundamental reason behind the behavior of the regressive left. And to do that, I'm going to need to provide you with some background in a branch of evolutionary biology called selfish gene theory, originally detailed in Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene. Let's imagine that you're a primitive hunter living in the savanna of Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago. Agriculture and the domestication of animals haven't occurred yet, so you're going to get all your food and resources by hunting and gathering. And of course, your primary goal, just as it is with any other species, is to survive, reproduce, and pass on your genetic material to the next generation. So to do this, you're going to need to hunt that food and gather those resources, which will help you survive and live long enough to find a mate and make some offspring. Acting in your own self-interest will help you accomplish your primary goal. But what if, one day, you can't hunt that food or gather those resources? What if there's a scarcity and someone else keeps taking all your bounty? Or if you have some kind of crippling injury that prevents you from hunting and gathering? You are now dependent on other people for your resources and for your survival. How are you going to get those resources? Well, you could always ask other people nicely for them, but remember, just like you're acting in your own self-interest to survive, they'll be acting in the same way and will want to hoard their resources. If you just asked for something while offering nothing in return, your provider won't want to give you anything because if they did, then they'd have a lower chance of survival with nothing to compensate for it. So, to persuade them to provide those resources, you'll have to promise to provide something in return. This way, you can get the resources you need, and your provider will be compensated for the sacrifice they made to help you survive. Now, if you don't follow up on your promise, then that provider won't trust you, and he won't continue to provide you with resources. That means that you've deprived yourself of a perfectly good means of survival, so it's within your best interest to follow up on your promise and compensate your provider. As a result, your provider will trust you, and the next time you need something from them, they'll be willing to provide it because they'll trust you to provide something else in return, thus creating a constant back-and-forth loop of providing for each other and helping each other to survive and reproduce. This is called reciprocal altruism, the most common form of altruism among non-related individuals, essentially an evolutionary version of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And it's the best evolutionary strategy for social animals like ants, bees, fruit bats, and, yes, humans. Individuals who engage in reciprocal altruism will have a higher chance of reproduction than those who don't, and if you're naturally inclined toward this kind of cooperative behavior as a result of a genetic variation in your DNA, then that genetic tendency will be passed down and proliferate in the gene pool because everyone who didn't have that tendency died, resulting in a species made up of only individuals who are instinctively altruistic. And as that species evolves and continues to act altruistically, it will come to value altruism on a higher level than that of pure material gratification. Your neighbor might not benefit from your altruism directly, but if they see you acting altruistically towards someone else, then they'll be more likely to trust you and provide you with resources because you've signaled to them through your actions that you're participating in a good and valued evolutionary strategy. This trust through observation is called prestige bias, providing you with a kind of social capital that you can now trade for resources instead of having to rely entirely on material capital. In the eyes of the rest of the population, you're not just a trustworthy person, you're a good person, an upstanding person. Your worth as a person is determined by how well you conform to the socially encouraged behavior of altruism. Altruism has evolved from a purely materialistic value and become a moral value. Human societies have a habit of making moral values out of behaviors that helped us to survive in our evolutionary past. And in a slightly more developed human society where you don't have to hunt and gather anymore, but you still have those biologically based cultural norms, you can exploit the hell out of them to get more and more social capital. Let's say that it's considered moral in your community to, for example, give money to charity. Instead of actually giving to charity, you can say that you love what charities do for the poor, Or you can heap praise upon charitable persons. Or you can even say something as simple as, "I think it's good to give to charity." If you present yourself as believing in the inherent virtue of your society's cultural norms, then your neighbors will see that you're on board with the norms that they themselves value, and the collective society values. And so you'll be treated as a trustworthy member of the societal in-group and be given all the benefits that come with that. This is a tactic called virtue signaling, a rhetorical adherence to society's norms that will mark you as a member of the in-group. And in a cohesive in-group where everyone shares the same values, everyone's going to help out everyone else because they've proven themselves to be worthy members of the group, and everyone in that group will be able to survive, reproduce, and teach those same values to their children, leading to an endless cycle of compliance and survival. So if you have a genetic tendency to conform to clear guidelines of behavior, or to be oriented towards group activity or approval, then those tendencies, once again, will be passed down and proliferate in the gene pool. This is why humans have a tendency towards group behavior, towards in-group preference, towards tribalism, because it's a biological imperative. It's in our very genetic makeup to want to be part of and contribute to something greater than ourselves, and to demonize other people and groups who don't conform to our own societal values. It's why religions have flourished for all of human civilization, and why such horrendous wars have been waged in their name. It's why people are so loyal to their local sports teams, and why they enter into rivalries with others. And I would argue that, in large part, it's why the political spectrum in America has become so polarized, and why each side is so quick to attack the other. Do you see where I'm going with this? The social justice movement is a result of humanity's fundamental instinct to belong to the group. It has become a cohesive ideological in-group, held together by incessant virtue signaling and uniformity of ideas and values. Anyone who doesn't conform to these ideas, or who doesn't virtue signal the right way, is automatically cast out as an other, an evil and malicious member of the outgroup. And not only does this ideological and political tribalism feed the desire to contribute to something greater than oneself, it fuels its members' self-righteousness when that something greater is not just the group, but the perceived benefit of all of humanity.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
It is our duty to win.
We must love each other.
We must love each other.
We must support each other.
We must support each other.
We have nothing.
We have nothing
to lose.
To lose.
But our change.
But our change.
This is the ultimate form of narcissism, when helping others is not done out of sincerity, but out of self-gratification and a need to be validated by others. And the easiest way to get that validation, of course, is not by actually helping people, not by getting down and dirty and giving aid to someone less fortunate than you, not by sacrificing your time or money or energy to benefit your fellow man, but by telling people that you like all those things, so that you can get more social capital. Isn't it easier to bemoan the plight of the poor rather than putting forth the effort to do your part in fixing it? Isn't it easier to criticize the oppressor rather than uplift the oppressed? I've spoken before about the easiness of social justice, of the unchallenging ideas and easily digestible slogans, but this, I think, may be the easiest of them all. The idea that you can help someone without actually helping someone.
You know, there's still some people out there that say, what does being PC really mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means you love nothing more than beer, working out, and that feeling you get when you rhetorically defend a marginalized community from systems of oppression.
The vanity and superficiality with which people employ social justice is astounding. But we gravitate towards those easy ideas and solutions because they're expedient. Because, at the end of the day, we're still driven by our animal instincts, and those instincts cry for immediate gratification. On a purely biological level, our lives are fundamentally a day-by-day struggle for survival and reproduction, and if we're given a number of means to achieve that end, then we're going to want to choose the one that inconveniences us the least, the one that costs us the fewest resources. And one of those means, and quite possibly the most efficient one, is the acquisition of social capital through virtue signaling. This is what worries me the most about social justice, and about the culture war that's currently being fought by the likes of me and so many others. I worry that by and large, the people who speak up against the progressive left have underestimated the problem. This isn't just a few trigger warning, safe space, special snowflake college kids being entitled, sheltered millennials. I wish it were only that simple. If you think that's all that's going on here, you haven't paid close enough attention. This ideology is infesting academia. It's being parroted by the highest government offices in the world. Grown adults are adopting ideas that didn't even come into mainstream cultural consciousness until a few years ago as absolute truth. How could so many bad, illogical, dishonest, oppressive ideas flourish at such a scale over such a short period of time? Tribalism. It's because they play into our most base instincts. Being a social justice activist is a symptom of our very humanity. The underlying mechanisms that make social justice so easily adoptable are entrenched in the human condition. And that is a scary thing. That is why this is going to be such a difficult battle to fight, because it's near impossible to get someone to act against their instinct, against their group membership that gives them purpose in life and gratification of their tribalistic urges. Do you know how difficult it is to convince a deeply religious person that God doesn't exist? Can you imagine the existential dread that a believer can go through if they lose their faith? I believe that the same applies to social justice activists. It's why they cling to their ideology so desperately, why they react with such hostility to any challenge or threat to their worldview, because without it, they lose their purpose, their gratification. And on a less philosophical level, there are often unseen physiological benefits to belonging to an in-group that fosters a strong sense of community. It turns out that people who belong to such groups, especially some kind of religious group, live longer and have better mental and physical health than those who don't. When belonging to a group makes you sound of mind, it also makes you sound of body, yet another factor that helps us to survive and reproduce. Add the fact that social justice is compulsively altruistic, something else ingrained into the human psyche as I detailed earlier, and you have a doubly difficult task in front of you. And this whole explanation is why I ascribe more than one meaning to the phrase regressive left. A lot of people use the phrase in the sense that the authoritarian left is regressing humanity back to a time when society was less equal and more unjust and oppressive, dividing and segregating different demographics like society under Jim Crow. Well, I'd go back even further than that. The Enlightenment was an intellectual movement in which a number of authors and philosophers sought to employ logic, reason, and science to enact tangible human progress, and argued that intellectual and cultural discourse should not be determined by faith or loyalty to any religious group. The legacy of the Enlightenment is now the basis of modern Western society, giving us such fundamental values as empiricism, secularism, and individual liberty. The regressive left is regressing humanity back to a pre-Enlightenment era, in which evidence is trumped by faith or specious reasoning, and individual liberty gives way to collectivism and group membership. It is regressing us back to a time when we couldn't rise above our most base instincts and use our critical faculties to foster the progress the thinkers of the Enlightenment envisioned. Well, if we're going to overcome the primal nature of the social justice movement, perhaps it's time for another intellectual revolution.